Welcome to the Truth Has No Sides podcast. These conversations will be had to expand the minds and the consciousness of you, the listener. If you like the content of the show, please like the video and subscribe to our channel to help this message be seen and heard by more people. Thank you for being here and enjoy the episode. Red dots. We are recording. Today's guest is the wife of a guest from a couple weeks ago, Jay Patel. Her name is, hold on one sec, let me make sure I get this correct, Hannah Faulks Patel. And she is a specialty doctor in a mental health team. Jay and I had spoken a couple weeks ago, and if you watch that episode, he spoke about Hannah consistently, about how much she taught him, about her, how she's bringing spirituality and other things into her practice, into her life. And we started talking about how to get this conversation going, to talk about two worlds that, kind of like a Catholic and an atheist, where they are constantly fighting each other. It would be much better to combine the two. They would benefit from each other. And those two worlds we will get into in this episode. So Hannah, will you please let the world know who you are, what you do, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you for having me on today. It's a bit of an honour, really, to be invited. I'm Hannah. I was born not far from where I live, in the middle of England. I grew up in quite a strict Christian kind of setting. We were a part of a small kind of community church, so I've always had an awareness of spirituality. From quite a young age, I had a real hunger for my own spiritual experiences, and it was never enough to be going through the motions in any way for me. I always wanted to have my own sense of God and my own experiences of Him. So that's always been a big driver in my life. So I guess as I got a bit older and was exposed to some different people, I came across mostly other Christians. I guess I moved within those kind of circles, but came across people who thought differently to me, or who thought differently to what I was taught to believe. So some of your listeners who are perhaps more familiar with church and Christianity would be aware of, in some people's backgrounds, everything's quite traditionally led, whereas in others, there's more of a sense of encountering yourself with the supernatural, with Holy Spirit, and those kind of more experiential sides of things. And I was really always drawn to that. So at the time, that was not so much where my church was at, but it was what I desired. And then when I left for university, I guess my spirituality dried up a little bit. I got kind of sidetracked with life. I'd kind of always had this desire to help people, and I guess it was the early stages of wanting to express healing in some way for people, which is what took me into medical school. But that's kind of hardcore. Medical school, that experience was hardcore. And I think I hadn't appreciated when I started out how much I was desiring something that would fix me, and I thought knowledge would do that. I thought having a medical degree, being able to talk somebody through an x-ray or a set of blood results would be the thing that gave me a sense of confidence in my own self. And I didn't compute that that's what I thought. But in hindsight, it was. And obviously nothing external can do that for you. And in fact, because the bar is so high academically compared to my previous studies, it actually made everything worse, because I felt as a perfectionist like I couldn't meet those targets in the way that I could when I was still in school. So it kind of broke open some of the cracks in my sense of self. And for a while, I guess that took me a little bit away from more spiritual things. I felt quite let down. I struggled to connect with God, and I'd sort of lost track a little bit of myself, I think, of really the core of who I am. But through a series of events which involved me really kind of making some mistakes and doing some things that were regrettable, shall I say, I came into an experience of a new experience of God, and experiencing Him as somebody who wanted to heal me, and not just as somebody who had this list of rules that I couldn't keep. There were too many, and I couldn't do it, and I was fed up of trying. But I started to encounter Him as someone who actually just loved me and wanted to take me to a place of loving myself and dealing with painful things within me that were stopping me from being authentic. So that set off this kind of catalyst of things within me, even though it was born out of quite a difficult time. And I started to experiment with spiritual healing in the context still of Christianity. But I found that quite a beautiful thing. And I guess, as with your experiences, I'm enjoying reading your book and about how you cross paths with people in a really timely, aligned kind of way. I have had through my life similar experiences. So I came across somebody who was, well, older than my parents. So she's passed on now, but she was really influential to me for a period of time. And she introduced me to somebody called, not directly to his podcast, a guy called Justin Abraham, I think Jay mentioned when you guys were talking, who's a Christian mystic. And engaging with him, starting to go to some of the events that he put on, just like started to open my horizons, like beyond what I've been taught. I began to understand church a bit differently. I began to see some things I hadn't seen before in the way that people can perhaps be a bit controlled, a bit told what to think, and not so much pursuing things from a place of authenticity, not so much getting healed from the inside out, but actually just trying to tick boxes. And so increasingly that system was not sitting with me. And that kind of came to a head at a time of like a huge change in my life. And kind of preceding that, I'd prayed this prayer to be aligned into the purpose for my life, basically, and what I agreed before I came to Earth to do. And I didn't really anticipate quite what would happen as a result of that. I don't know if I'd have been brave enough to pray it, to be quite honest with you. I'm glad I did, but it opened up a very turbulent time in my life, kind of leaving behind a lot of people.
What was that prayer? What were you asking for, and what happened?
So the exact prayer was to be aligned into my destiny, and with a sense that there was an agreement that I made before I came here to release, maybe not so much about doing certain things, but being a certain way, releasing a certain frequency. And I guess I believe that's written into your DNA. But often we come and we forget, we get sidetracked, we get trauma, we forget. And so that was the prayer. And within 2 years of that, I was out of a long-term relationship. I was living in a different part of the city. I'd gone from being, at that time, a housewife to look after my children, to being back in my current job, having not been in our healthcare system for about 10 years at that point. I moved out of church. My friendship group completely changed. So it was a really radical time, and it exposed all of the places in me where I'd been dependent on people's approval, doing things the way I'd always known. All of those safety net things that I hadn't appreciated were holding my ego together at that time. And so suddenly all of those props were gone. And it was this extraordinary time in terms of alignment and provision. The people that came into my life at that time, Jay was a very significant part of that. And his support at great personal cost to me enabled me to get through that time. But it was like I put my foot out and there was nothing there, and as I put my foot out, the stepping stone appeared in front of me. It was really a remarkable time with some really beautiful spiritual encounters. But in the middle of that, it was like this sort of oscillation between sort of ecstatic, bliss-filled, wow, this is amazing, right into, I don't think I can take any more of this, those extremes of emotional experience.
Yeah, that's a pretty common theme. What are those things that doctors have on their desks where it's those 5 balls and you throw one up and it hits, and right? I don't know.
Yeah,
the pendulum. Right? So it always seems to me that pendulum for as someone is speeding up their spiritual process of no doing of their own, right? There was something that you agreed to, something in this life that was going to speed that process up. Before creation comes destruction. And it seems to me that pendulum can swing all the way up for dozens and dozens of lifetimes. And someone can be a devout Catholic and it's going to stay there. And then it's going to slowly come down and those questions start coming and everything else. And then it hits again, and then maybe something in this life happens and they become an atheist, and it swings back up for another couple dozen lifetimes. It seems to me, from my direct experience, I listened to your story, I listened to many people's story, that when the spiritual process is kicked into high gear, that pendulum is very quick. You can have, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm connected to God. I feel source. I can't believe everything I've went through, all the hell I went through is so beautiful. I love it. To the very next day, to swinging over here and saying, what did I do? This is horse shit. I can't believe this is happening to me. And it's constant.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to quite a few people, including myself, when I was talking to my teacher. I thought I was going crazy because I felt like I was bipolar. I felt like I had no stability because it was constant. It was a good week, a bad week, a good day, a bad day, a good month, a bad month. There was no consistency that I was used to when I was younger, in my teenage or 20 or 30s. It's just, and when I started reading, getting around the teacher, the meditation, conversations like this, I mean, I even get a pit in my stomach still because it's constant. And it seems like as that centers out, that pendulum stops, and then we kind of just accept the good and the bad days without thinking of the extremes of each. So yeah, I continue. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I had no grid for it at the time. I guess I'd not. And people talk about Kundalini awakenings being like that, don't they? But I'd not got any sort of grid for anything like that at the time. And it started about a year before things really ramped up. And I, like you, I just thought, what's wrong with me? Like, this just seems odd. I've had kind of experiences have been low. I had a period of depression in my 20s, but that was consistent at least. At least kind of I knew what I was doing with it because it was the same pretty much every day. There wasn't that kind of, the crazy shifts. And things like that, I guess, make me wonder. This is a kind of tangent, but it makes me wonder about some of the people we treat in hospital. But anyway, so that was where I was at probably 8 years ago.
It's very hard for me not to go into what you just said, because that's where we'll go further down. But I've always had that thought process of the people in hospital that they see things or they hear things. And if you
Yeah.
know, most medical professionals are incredibly intelligent, but they haven't seen things, they haven't heard things. If they did, they'd be checked into a loony bin. I've always wondered how many people have been told they're crazy because of admitting to seeing
Mm,
angels or hearing a different voice or having a different sense of perception that the spiritual process brings out in a lot of people. If we're lucky enough,
mm,
like you, to have that older lady that kind of helped you understand what was going on, and my teacher helped me understand, and someone who says, yes, what you're experiencing is real and it's okay. Because I think more times than not,
yeah.
when first of all, most people won't admit to that because they know the people around them will think they're crazy. And if they think they're crazy, they're going to admit them, put them on medication, and suppress it, which makes it 1,000 times worse. And if everyone around you who
Yeah.
loves you and you trust is saying something's wrong, it's very difficult for even the most confident human to say, shit, maybe something is wrong with me. Um, so,
Yeah.
like you said, the way we treat certain people, and that's kind of where we'll go with this conversation and why I was excited about this conversation because of what you're doing in your profession. So continue with your story.
Yeah, and I've got some things to sort of respond to with that when we
Okay.
come back to it. That yeah, it is something I've thought about. Um, so yeah, about 8 years ago, I'm a newly single mum and out of church for the first time in my whole life, and with a very small group of friends. Most of us who were traumatized at that time by the experiences we were having from various sources. So we were a little crew of people who just felt like a mess, but we kept pursuing the path, and that took us to various places around the world actually, but included a friend and I went to a conference in Alabama where somebody was teaching about something called the healing codes. I don't know if you've come across that in your
Yep.
journey. You have. So, in case your listeners haven't, it's a book which involves it's kind of a strategy for healing emotional trauma, but it can have the side effects of healing physical things at the same time. And it involves holding your fingers at different energy points around your face and repeating positive affirmations and prayers. So that kind of, I think because it came from somebody I trusted, it kind of unlocked this idea for me of energy points in the body, which was again something that was really not on my radar. Um, and that led me, um, I don't know if that actually led me, but I ended up also doing some mentoring with somebody that I trusted who was teaching about meditation. And again, that was something that, it sounds crazy now to think that I'd never really tapped into anything to do with meditation. But and this is sort of lockdown period now, where that came into my radar, and just this sense of permission to explore other ways of connecting. I'd always used like worship, or I'd got into probably quite contemplative states, and I'd done that quite intuitively, but not understood what I was doing. And so this idea you can meditate and that helps you helps you sort of shift the balance of which bit of you's in charge, and um, to enter those states where your brain waves start to shift, and it has an impact on your body and it has an impact on what goes on around you. And that's taken me to Kundalini yoga. It's taken me to Joe Dispenza and his teachings on meditation and manifesting. And it's just opened up this whole world. And then in the last few years, energy healing. And all of these layers have been such a blessing to my life. I feel I feel so blessed. I feel like I can't imagine how my life was before I came across like-minded people who understand these kinds of things, what my life was like before I understood that you can release energy without having to talk about your trauma to somebody, and expose a vulnerability in you that maybe you're not ready to expose. And all of these different elements have brought this level of healing to my life. Yeah, and it's kind of blown my mind, really. So that's sort of where I'm at now. Still exploring, still loads left in my journey in terms of shedding things that aren't helpful and reducing the role of the ego, all of these things. But feeling blessed to be where I am in my life.
The and if you see me doing this, it's just writing notes down so I don't miss questions. Um, how hard was it? Because I hear this continuously. How hard was it to shed the strict Christian beliefs? Because I mean, there's billions, and as things evolve, not good or bad, people start asking different questions. So,
Mm,
like here in Utah, a considerable amount of people are very strict Mormons, and then you've got the groups who
yeah,
are they leave Mormonism and they're incredibly anti-Mormon. Right? They're very harsh about it, just like the atheist with the Catholic. Those strict upbringings always seem to be they seem to cause a lot of issues for those who finally start questioning and start moving in a different direction. Um, like with
mhm,
my teacher was very excited when he first met me to find out I had no background. I was not Mormon. I was not
yeah,
Christian. I was not atheist. I was not agnostic. I didn't even understand Buddhism or any of it. I had never, for some reason, my parents were very neutral and never talked about it, never had us go to church, even being surrounded by the influence of it. So it was very unique. I was a,
mm,
just a pasty white, clear board for him to help me move forward. But I've heard so many stories of that
yeah,
strict background, and I just knowing myself, if I had anyone forcing me to do certain things I didn't want to do, the first thing I did was rebel. So
yeah.
how difficult is it to let go of beliefs that our lives were built around and were taught to us by those who love us and we trust? Our parents, our gods.
Yeah. Um, it's hard. It's definitely a process. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there that have some kind of blinding revelation or encounter, and they're left with a completely different mindset. That wasn't has not been
Yeah.
my experience. It's been a slow and steady
Yes.
kind of. Um, I suppose I believe sort of there's two things really. One is that I believe there's sort of a religious spirit that it gets into the major religions. I think there are truths in there were a lot of truths within Christianity. I don't have an issue with God. I don't have an issue with Jesus. That's not the issue for me. It is the
Mm-hmm.
system that has developed around the Bible and put these filter systems in place so that you interpret it through the sort of linear, mind-based Western culture way of trying to interpret everything. Um, but it was really hard at the beginning because I just felt like because I've always been a bit of a people pleaser, and I guess I've not got that. I've not had that same rebellious streak you described. Like if someone tries to control you, your reaction would be to push against that. Mine was very much always to just do what is going to cause me the least amount of
Mm-hmm.
bother and keep everybody happy. And as long as I'm not upsetting people, then I'm okay. Then I'm safe. So that's been my
Mm-hmm.
challenge. um, I guess I've been fortunate in the sense that there have become people in my circle who have made that transition themselves at some point. So that's made it easier. And having other people, even if it was a small band of quite messed up people, we did at least have each other. And so, yeah, I think that's one side of it. And I guess the other thing is, I think that some of the people I've listened to, one of them in particular, has got this really beautiful honour and appreciation for people from different faiths. And that's not to say you have to believe everything other people believe, but I think if your heart's open to other people and to honour their devotion or to honour what's good about what they walk with, it helps you to be, it helps you to take what's good instead of always having the dividing lines of, well, you believe this and I believe that and we're different. And I suppose that's something you wouldn't normally hear in church, particularly. But I think it's a very lovely way of living. I don't know if I've answered your question at all. I think
no, I appreciate all of the answers I get on this podcast because they're not in a box. Many people may listen to the answers of you or certain guests and think like that wasn't an answer. No, it was an answer, because we as humans are so conditioned that when a question is asked, we immediately, almost simultaneously, create a box that we need that answer to be in to make us feel comfortable. Is that person right? Is that person on our side? Does that person understand us? Do they think what we think? If not, it's not comfortable. They don't like it. Maybe we don't like that answer. Maybe we don't like you. Maybe I don't like this. I don't like this. Right? So I love the answers. That's why I love this podcast being a little unstructured, where we just kind of start the conversation off and we talk about how we're just going to go off on tangents. I don't want the structure. So yeah, that was a great answer. One of the other things I've noticed with a lot of strict Christian backgrounds is they will venture out, but they venture out with something that's comfortable. So they go to mystical Christian. So Christian mysticism, right? So they'll work with the teachings of someone who had a strict Catholic background, but has expanded on what the teachings mean, right? That's that next step. And then a lot of people will move into the meditations. Maybe they'll step into Buddhism because they think the Western religions are all, something's wrong with them, and Eastern religions are better. What always interests me is how we miss the part that they all come from the same source. Everything on this planet, every person, animal, plant, being, consciousness, stars, religions, constructs, politics, if we just sit back for a second and we just dig a little deeper than we're used to, they all come from the same source. And the only thing that changes is one human's perception of what they think God is. So one person's Buddhist, one person's Catholic, one person is atheist, one person is Mormon. If you really just slow down and ask just a few more questions, it all came from that same source. It all came from the same source, and it's so glaring to me how similar all of them are, yet for thousands and thousands of years, we have been at such conflict with each other to the point of killing each other. I see war and I see TV shows and I see what's on the news and I hear people debate and discuss and argue. It just doesn't make sense to me that we haven't seen through that yet.
Yeah. I think it's interesting you mentioned debating, because it immediately took me back to an experience in university where the Christian Union had organised a debate with whatever the equivalent was of maybe the Islamic Society is probably what they would be called themselves. I remember just thinking, how is arguing actually, nobody got anywhere through winning an argument. What does that mean? Or not winning an argument? I don't know. I guess because it's all like brain on brain, isn't it? Mind on mind, rather than, I don't know what. I know there are differences between people, and I love Jesus. I'm not deviating from that in any of the things that I've explored. But I do find it interesting that people who have explored the mystical elements of different religions seem to, like you say, end up in quite a similar place, end up in with quite similar perspectives. And yeah, I just think that's interesting.
Well, I do love, Plato talks about it, and I think I put it in the book, but he said debate is a verbal sport with winners and losers. As such, it is less about the truth and more about who looks and sounds the best. And I always think of really good lawyers who get someone off on a
Yeah.
technicality for committing murder. The person still committed
Yes.
murder, but because of some technicality and that ability to argue and debate and manipulate a group of 12 people,
Yeah.
that person gets away with it. Just because that lawyer is incredible at arguing and intelligence and words and wordsmithing doesn't make him or her right. But we have a lot of very, very intelligent people now who have millions and millions, tens of millions of people following them, like Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, Dawkins, Alex O'Connor, all of these guys that make an incredible living off of debating and arguing. And I remember listening to Jordan Peterson talk to Alex O'Connor just recently, and he says at the beginning of that video, "I've never liked debate." And I was like, what? That's all you do. That's all you do is argue and debate, which nothing wrong with it. And I watch him and Sam Harris, like that's the big thing now. Him and Sam Harris go at it because Jordan Peterson is become more and more Catholic, devout Catholic, and Sam Harris is an atheist. And tens of millions of people watch that all the time. I personally don't understand I don't understand it. I don't understand how that benefits. I really don't. I think it's I really don't. My fiance is also, I asked her about that, and she brought up a good point though. She said that maybe listening to that, an atheist listening to Jordan Peterson will open him or her up to a different perspective and bring them closer to the middle. Maybe someone listening to Sam Harris will bring a Catholic more to the middle and not being so strict in their beliefs. So I can understand that as well. So, and maybe my not liking arguments and debate is more about kind of like you, my people pleasing, my not wanting to be a part of conflict. But I've never understood that Republicans and Democrats arguing, they're not looking to be right. They're looking to prove the other side wrong. And if we look at our world, we've been doing that for thousands of years and hasn't really helped change anything.
Yeah. When you said about the legal system, the judge or the lawyer you were talking about, so I wrote a book about connecting with inner wisdom, and it took me to I think it was the first chapter in my book. I was thinking very much along those same lines, that you can be in a courtroom and the truth doesn't come out because the clever manipulations and the intellect, that because everything is run from here, not from here. And truth is something you connect with here. I'm not saying your mind has to completely disengage, but if everything is run from mind and ego, we're sort of missing the point, aren't we? Because that's not the fullness of who we are. It's a small part of who we are is probably the least evolved part of who we are in many ways, and in terms of where you can develop your intuition, you can get healed and have your emotions function better so that you can more readily connect with your heart. But the mind, to me, that's my goal, at least, for my mind to be subject to that and to be following that. Because I think that's where you really make connections with people. It's listening from here to what's gone on, and yeah, that's my.
Yes, I completely agree. And that's something that a lot of teachers are talking about, how we're going from mind-based mentalities to the heart-based, kind of a lot of the natural occurrence of most humans of their heart opening. And that's the other big
Yeah.
point that has always sat in the back of my mind is when we are left to our own devices, look at what we do. Luckily, there is
Mm-hmm.
that natural source, that natural energy, that natural consciousness that evolves on its own, kind of like a 17-year-old turning 18. Right? We had nothing to do with that. We didn't need to learn anything. We didn't need a teacher. We didn't need a guide. It's just 365 days later, we turn a different age. And luckily, that
Mm-hmm.
natural energy, consciousness, source, whatever you want to call it, is moving us forward. Right? We have a lot of teachers and
Yeah.
people are talking about how there's that shift. A lot of timelines are coming to an end. A lot of planetary alignments have not been seen for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Everyone can feel that energy shifting, just like you talked about your process and feeling out of whack. You were with that, you left the church, you're with a group of people who thought things were kind of coming undone. You guys felt out of place. That is that natural occurrence that I think 8 billion people are feeling right now. And as much because
Yeah.
we're still head and ego based, we love security, we love stability, we love to know what's coming next, and we don't know. We don't know. And that's
Yeah.
what's causing all the chaos. As they say, creation, before creation comes destruction. So a lot of that stuff is being
Yeah.
destroyed right now. And even knowing that, it doesn't really help. But it's interesting to watch this unfold and watch a lot of very confident, clear-minded people become unconfident and very muddy in their minds. It's been quite a process.
Yeah. It's
Mm-hmm.
exciting though. I think like just the shift in awareness towards these kind of themes, and maybe it's just because I'm more tuned in than I was
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago. But it feels like, even the pandemic, as awful as that was, opening up the way that we connect online and different platforms, and the access to these kind of themes just seems to have escalated to me. How easy it is to find somebody on Instagram that is saying something that you really need to hear, or um, it feels like there's this. It feels like there's this growing awareness globally towards these themes.
One thing I'd like to ask you about with that, yes, a lot, we have easier access to a lot of this information.
Mm-hmm.
I know what you just said. You believe it's helping. Is there also a part of it that's confusing a lot of people because there's so many new people coming out with so much new information that is causing people to go off in a million different directions, only to cause a stagnation in a sense where it's just like I don't know who to listen to. I don't know what meditation to do. I don't know what healing frequency. I don't know what religion. I don't know what God is anymore. I I don't know what to do. I'm just going to go back to my normal life.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think you have to be very focused in a way. Um, like it's holding a balance, isn't it, of openness with I'm not going to just open myself up to whoever, and following what's intuitively right for you for a period of time, whether that lasts long term or whether it's a short term thing and then something else comes along. But you're right. I think it can be overwhelming.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
It seems like it. Okay,
Mm.
so could we step more into the profession? How you're kind of combining the two
Mm.
worlds? Because earlier on you talked about hardcore medical school. Um, can you talk about that
Yeah.
process of learning what you learned, but then also bringing in the spiritual side of your process and your path, and combining the two and not separating them?
Yeah. So I guess medical school and my first few years being a doctor were when I was at quite a different point. So they never felt overly combined. I don't mean that I tried to keep them separate, but I didn't have any issue with the medical model as it was taught. I guess that felt like where things were at for me at the time. I loved learning about the body and all the details of how everything works. And then in those sort of 10 years or so where I wasn't working and I had my own mental health experiences of depression, well, I'd had them actually before I left, but during that time, my own spiritual journey was developing. So I was experiencing healing on certain levels for myself, particularly in the context of my mental health, and starting to realise, obviously, depression isn't understood as something, even within psychiatry, something you just have medication for. There's a concept around therapy and trying to address past things or trying to address the way your mind tends to work so you can try and bring that into a more helpful way. And for me, those things haven't worked. I think I tried cognitive behavioural therapy when I was in my 20s. Couldn't get along with it. Felt like I was trying to pull myself up by my own bootstraps. Had some psychodynamic therapy, which I've got a lot of respect for both of those things. But for me at the time, they just weren't, I wasn't ready.
Could you give the listeners and myself, just so I understand more detail of those two therapies? What are they? What do they mean? What does a human being, what does an individual go through?
So cognitive behavioural therapy, usually reduced to CBT for speed. So that's quite commonly practiced, certainly in the UK. I would imagine it is in the US as well. It tends to be focused on, you set a goal with your therapist, and maybe, say if you have a problem going out to the shops because you get scared, it's trying to help you break that cycle of avoidance, which makes your fears about it build, and trying to break that cycle so that you, partly by challenging your belief about it's not safe to go out, for example, by actually doing it, but also by thinking of alternative things you could be thinking. So it's quite good for people who have a particular issue they want to address practically. And it's good for people who are quite logical, I think, who are good at going, well, no, that's a stupid thought, let me think this instead. But I think if you're more emotional as a person, it might be a little bit harder to engage with. Everybody's different.
Would this be considered kind of like exposure therapy?
Exposure therapy can come into that, yeah. So that it's a really commonly used in, not just in secondary mental health services, but in primary healthcare in the UK. And it's really good for anxiety and depression. There's an evidence base for it. But I struggled with it because I felt like I was trying to change myself and I couldn't do it. Yeah, sorry, what were you going to say?
Go ahead.
And then the other type that's more psychotherapy is a bit deeper. It's going a bit more into your past and thinking about things that happened in the past and helping you resolve that. And at that time in my life, I think I just everything that I had experienced that was difficult, I just repressed so deeply. It was probably abundantly obvious to the psychiatrist that I had some stuff that I felt angry about, but I couldn't connect to
Mhm.
that at all. So I was saying, no, 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 it's all fine. Couldn't connect to that. So I guess I had to be at a different point in my life before I could start to acknowledge actually I've got quite a bit of anger about certain
Mhm.
things that happened. Um, so I could be at a point of letting go of that. So I'd experienced that before I stopped work, and then during my time of being at home, I'd had more spiritual experiences of healing, dealing with things that were going on in my life. And I guess it brought me into an awareness that in the context of depression, it's not just, pills can really help people. I just want to say that because I think sometimes people have a lot of guilt around medication. I should be able to fix myself. And honestly, sometimes I just think we're at a point where you might need
Mhm.
a bit of a platform to boost you so that
Yes.
you can
Yes.
start to deal with things. It's not pretending it's going to fix everything in your life because it won't, but it's there's a role for it, especially when people, are really bad, suicidally bad. So I don't want to give the message at all that I don't think medication's good. I think there's definitely a place for it. But I guess I came into this awareness that there were things in my relationships, people I needed to forgive, or people that I needed to have better boundaries with to protect myself differently. And if I was just going to continue letting people walk all over me, of course I was going to stay feeling awful about my life because that wasn't a good thing. So I guess by the time I'd come back into work, I'd got a slightly broader
Mhm.
sense of what a
Yes.
journey can look like for someone coming out of it. The team I work in is focused on psychosis, so that's more around the more unusual experiences or disordered thinking. So I don't have personal experience of that particularly, but I suppose, as we touched on before, I think for some people it can be part of their spiritual journey that they might have some of these experiences. And I read a really interesting book called Psychosis and Spirituality, written by like a bunch of different authors, um, all of whom were far cleverer than me, and I didn't understand all of what I read. But there was a really interesting chapter where they were really delving into like the differences between people that end up on a psychiatric ward because of their experiences versus people in faith communities that have quite similar experiences but somehow miss the mental health system. And there was this sense that for people who have quite a strong sense of themselves, they can tolerate maybe more of those out of normal experiences, and it
Mhm.
doesn't shatter them. But if that's for whatever reason, probably trauma based reasons, that's difficult. Those weirder experiences might cause more of a sense of, well, just fragmentation. So I guess it just points to the fact that it's just not all black and white, is it? I
Do you,
think even in those circumstances, I think medication might have a place for people because it might stabilise things enough to help them
I
reflect.
completely agree. Do you? It seems to me that, and it could be a level of consciousness, meaning, um, what is the, that book talks about the difference between someone who have two people who have the same experience. One goes into a psychotic episode and is admitted, and one person's like, "Oh my God, I'm closer to God than ever, and I'm awakening." It seems to me, and,
Yeah,
and again, I talk about this continuously. It seems to me that the level of consciousness and the discussion of that needs to be more prevalent, because for a fourth grader to experience something could absolutely, as a child, could absolutely alter who that human being is, and create issues for the rest of that individual's life because it stunts where maybe their emotional growth is fourth grade, and from that point on, they become adults, they go into their 20s, 30s, and 40s, but that's where they're stuck. For someone who
Yeah.
is in high school, someone in college, someone in a PhD level program who goes through that same experience, it could they have the capacity, the experience, the understanding, the people around them to say, no, this is what's happening. This is a good thing, right? Now, when I use
Mm-hmm.
fourth grade and college level understanding of levels of consciousness, I'm not really saying a 9-year-old and a 22-year-old are going to handle it differently. As adults, the level of consciousness on this planet is quite low if you listen to Dr. Hawkins and Ramaji and others who talk about levels of consciousness. So you could have a 40-year-old, very successful, very intelligent, devout Catholic who has a very low level of consciousness that goes through an experience and starts to see things or hear things, and it's over. The way they're going to describe it, the
Mm.
energy they're going to bring to that experience, whether they suppress it or they can't suppress it enough and they start to talk to someone like you or a friend or a family member, and everyone around them feels that same way and has that same level of consciousness, they're going to think something's drastically wrong, and they're probably going to admit them. If that 40-year-old successful, intelligent human being has a higher level of consciousness and goes through that same experience and maybe sees an angel or hears a different voice, they're going to see it in a different way. They're going to bring a different energy to it. They're not going to be as nervous or scared. It's not going to shatter things. They're going to understand that that's part of the awakening process. And
Mm.
I'm blown away by how the levels of consciousness is not spoken about more, because we always give adults the benefit of the doubt that as they've grown in wisdom, and they've grown in levels of consciousness, and they've grown in levels of clarity. And if you look at the billions of people who are Catholic, billions of people who are Muslim, billions of people who are atheist, and how devout, not devout, but how strict they are, how much they double down on their beliefs, like a Republican and a Democrat, it shows me that the
Mm.
level of consciousness on this planet is not high at all. And if they do start seeing things, angels, they start hearing voices, they listen to someone like you about energy healing in different ways other than direct medical procedures or direct medical um, advice, uh, it just doesn't compute to them. And it's going to throw their world for a loop. But I really wish that levels of consciousness
Mm.
was brought more into the medical system, into therapy, into psychiatric, into just the conversation abroad for 8 billion people, to help them better understand that those people who think it's such a bad thing, it's not. There are very extreme examples. I'm sure you've been a part of that, but most of that time
Mm.
it's not. It's just it's a it's an awakening.
I think, yeah, I mean, I suppose I've met some people who would have labelled what they experienced in hindsight something spiritual. For other people, I think their experiences of maybe hearing voices or the types of things they find themselves believing are more persecutory
Okay.
and frightening. And so probably you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, this is maybe a good thing, it's just you can't handle it. It's more that it's actually a really horrible thing. So, and I think in both instances, whether it's could be perceived as a good thing that the person perhaps wasn't ready for, or straightforwardly a horrible thing, somebody's trauma, and like you mentioned, if something happens when you're in the fourth grade and you get stuck emotionally at that level, all of those things that create the pathways we make in our minds, and they all come into play, don't they? I think you can I've met spiritual people in my job whose spiritual experiences are still filtered through their brokenness, through God is harsh, so he's
Yes.
going to punish me. And so then it's all interwoven because we're so complex, aren't we? Even how you and I could have the same spiritual encounter, but you and I might interpret it differently depending on our life experiences and how we see the world. And I think psychologists have a better handle on this in general, probably, than most doctors, if I'm honest. I think they are much more heart-based in the way they approach people. I think they're much more willing to see things alongside people. I think there are some really lovely movements within psychiatry towards sitting with people more and trying to hear their story in a different way. But I guess that sort of split between what you're talking about in terms of understanding consciousness and having a more holistic view of things represents society as a whole, doesn't it? Like the people that come through my doors in terms of service users will have that same breadth of, some of them would just want pills and not think any more about anything. Some of them would want to understand things spiritually. Interestingly, I meet quite a lot of people who label something as a spiritual or an energetic thing until they've been in and out of hospital a number of times, and then they think, actually, this medication is going to help not end up back here again. So it doesn't feel black and white to me. It feels case by case. Yeah.
Have you seen things shift in your profession? Have you been able to talk to more of your patients about this kind of stuff, or is there still a wall that is there for the safety of your practice and the safety of the patient?
There's definitely a wall in that, and I think in many ways that's appropriate, because I'm in a position. I don't feel like I'm in a position of power because I don't try and treat people that way, but I am, especially to somebody who's been in hospital against their will and then they come and see me. There's a level of there's a perceived power imbalance, at least. So if I start to talk about something that I believe, it needs to be clear that that's something I believe, and it needs to be clear that that person actually wants to know what I believe. So I wouldn't ever instigate those conversations, because it would be kind of seen as an abuse of my position. But I think things like mindfulness and that role of meditation in helping people to be in a better place, that's making its way more into medical practice. I think that's a really positive thing. So I do think there are some shifts, but I guess because certainly in UK psychiatric history, I was listening to a podcast a few weeks ago about a whistleblower back in the 60s who was really highlighting all of these psychiatrists are basically carrying out experiments on their patients without their consent. And I guess those walls have come up to make sure that that can't happen and people aren't exposed to anything that isn't seen as evidence-based and approved nationally as a way of treating whatever the condition is. And yet I also, alongside that, I tussle with, in my own mind, diagnoses and how helpful that is. It seems to have a place. But on the other hand, there are always different ways of approaching someone's experiences.
It seems, with the way humans are and the way our mind is built, that the only tool we've been given to perceive the world, the mind, which loves structure, which wants to know, it seems like someone looking for a diagnosis, in a sense, can really help them. It boxes them in. It removes a lot of possibilities. But the diagnosis, giving them a box, giving them something to live their life in, to feel like they know what's going on, I assume is quite a relief for many patients.
yeah, I think some people definitely, and some people's families, I think, especially families where the person themselves perhaps doesn't recover properly, or that it's a recurrent issue, for them having that sense of this is what you might expect. Um, this is within the normal limits of what can go on for somebody with that condition can be comforting, I think, for people. Um, whereas for other people, I think it's another trauma
Mm-hmm.
on top of I already had a trauma. The whole experience was a trauma, and now this diagnosis is a trauma. So I think it's
Yeah.
different for everybody.
Yeah, and I've always wondered with this process of a diagnosis or a box or some type of structure, it's in a sense a band aid. It's great for the individual, it's great for the family, it's
Mm.
great for the short term of this existence, this incarnation. But it sounds like more and more people are moving past that diagnosis as a collective, as it takes generations and generations. That natural source we talked about earlier on in the podcast, that's moving humanity forward uh, and turning us from
Mm.
a 20-year-old to a 22-year-old. So very, very nuanced when it comes to religion, to politics, to the medical establishment, to any of these conversations. Uh, the
Mm.
more I learn, the more I have these conversations, the more I I can't point my finger at what is the right way, right? Like you said, it's very
Yeah,
because you've had this little box of awareness, and you've got certain things you understand about it, and it's very limited, and then it expands and expands. So there's just more coming at us, and it's very difficult to say what is right or wrong, and
yeah,
it's that a lot of that confidence comes from staying in that box, to really believing that Republicans are right, to really believing that um, atheism is correct, to really believing whatever that belief is, that construct is your way. And when it comes to that construct in this individual incarnation, it seems like life is a little bit easier when you can stay in that box and it feels right.
yeah. And I guess our all of our systems, education or healthcare or legal, all of those systems are developed in a very mind-based way, aren't they? They're not developed from a place of intuition, or so it's all systems, isn't it, and protocol, and it serves a it serves a place for where we've been at, what it's all going to look like in the future as consciousness continues to shift, and I don't
Yeah.
know. Um, I hope that we all learn to raise our frequency and we deal with these issues and we don't have them in the same way. Um, I think energy and frequency is going to take a higher priority in the future in terms of treating all sorts of things. Um,
Are you
yeah.
you Jay was telling me that you're working on a lot of that energy stuff right now. You're looking to bring more of that into your life. Is that for a personal thing? Is that for your practice? Is it for just a curiosity?
So it's a bit of both. Well, no, you've mentioned more than two things. That's more than both. Bit of everything. Um, it started out very much because I was a mess. Like emotionally, I felt a mess, and we discovered that somebody we knew who was an alternative health practitioner did trauma release work. I had no idea about any of it, but I thought I had a bad experience of therapy, so I'm going to try this. Um, and then recently, I've started doing some different work, which is more chakra based, and that's it's ramped up quite a lot since the end of the summer. I've been doing one or two sessions a week. Um, So it's quite intense. And I guess the aim is partly to shift my energy. Because I think if I shift my energy, obviously that benefits me, but it also benefits people around me. It
Yes.
shifts the energy in my home, it shifts the energy in my office, it helps me to handle things better. So there's a ripple effect from that. And I think the more of us do that, the better the world's going to be. So there is definitely a sense of a wider purpose for me in that. And yeah, not in a grandiose way, but I think me changing my frequency is a good thing for where I live. But also, it is something I'd like to learn. I'm beginning to learn to practice that as well. So I wouldn't be able to use that in my day job, but it's something I could do separate to that. And yeah, if I walk into a room with somebody suffering and I'm in a different emotional, energetic state, then I think that my impact on them will be more beneficial than if I walk in feeling traumatized and trying to get through the day
Yeah.
myself. It changes the
Yeah.
atmosphere, doesn't it?
I think actually, I know what you're doing outside of your practice is going to benefit everyone that crosses your path inside your practice. Your ability to see
Yeah,
things from a higher level, a different perspective, to expand their awareness, to not even have them practice what you practice, but just seeing it differently is is a natural thing for them. It's going to expand their consciousness. It's going to expand their perspective. It's going to expand their awareness even in the slightest bit, and it may allow them to see things in a little bit different way that will turn a mountain into a molehill, or turn an issue into something that uh, may be seen as not as bad or differently. So the work you're doing outside of that,
yeah,
it's going to help everything. Again, I think a lot of people on the spiritual path will take what they're practicing and try to implement it in every aspect of their life and every person that crosses their path. And I don't think that's the most beneficial way, because
no,
like you
I
said,
agree.
your your expanded consciousness, your frequency, your level of energy, being at a more open, um, better way, is going to expand the person at the grocery store that's standing next to you in line. So when it comes to you and having people who are
Mm,
directly working with you, and looking to you for guidance, that's an incredible benefit. And that doesn't mean talking about it in a way they don't understand, or talking about it in an energetic way, or talking about it at a level of consciousness that is only going to maybe scare them, or maybe make them feel that there's something wrong with you. So yeah, that's going to benefit everyone. I think that's great.
yeah,
That's going to be great.
yeah.
Let's see, what other notes have I got here?
I'm aware my battery is running a
A
bit
little bit low. Okay,
low.
so let's do this. Is there We're at an hour and 7 minutes. Is there anything else that you would like to discuss? If not, I've got just a few more questions for you.
Nothing
Okay.
coming to mind.
Well, then let's go with the end question that I always ask. What is truth to you?
Oh, such a hard question. Um, I think the best answer I can give is I think that to a certain extent, for each person, truth is what they're able to handle
Hmm.
in that moment that they can resonate with. But whatever truth I think that I've come across at this point, there's going to be higher truths that I encounter in the future. And I think truth is wider than a belief system. I think it's more of a realm that you engage with. um, Yeah,
I love those answers.
not a tidy
No,
answer.
no. Again, that's why I asked that question, because it's always different, and there's always every other question, whether it's an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, is almost immediately an answer has been given. Every time I ask that last question, there's a pause. There's always a pause, and it's
Yeah,
a difficult question to answer. It seems truth is ever expanding, ever expanding, and
yeah,
and no one can put their finger on it, because we're human. We're given a mind, and we're given a very limited perspective of what truth is, and the best we can do is, it seems like that answer is going to change at different levels of being a human, different levels of consciousness.
yeah.
So, okay, Hannah, thank you, Jay, for setting this up, for connecting us. Thank you for your time today.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I'll get this edited
Thank
up,
you.
cleaned up, and we'll get it out to the world in a week or two. So, Hannah, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing how the work you're doing will impact the people who cross your path.
Thank you so much. Appreciate talking to you. It's been